Hello everybody, this is Kirby over yonder, and with Adventure Time Distant Lands out of the way and the Fiona and Cake spin-off coming in 2023, I think now would be the best time to retrospectively discuss each individual season of Adventure Time. Expect this series to be a bit more casual and laid back than the Distant Lands review. Think sorta like the Real Jim Simpsons retrospectives, but with Adventure Time. My goal of this series is to analyze the trends that each individual season has, as well as how the show evolved and changed over time. With that said, this is Adventure Time Season 1. The first season of any show is very important because, well, it's the introduction. They're supposed to sell the audience on these characters and this world. And the best first seasons do this while still leaving room for the show to grow and develop over time. But you've also got to be careful not to set audience expectations too high, as it may lead to them being disappointed in the future. That being said, most shows' first seasons, even the best ones, have a reputation for feeling a little bit awkward compared to the rest of the show. And that's because these shows are still developing, they're still trying to figure out their identity, what they are. Sure, every once in a while you'll get a show like Breaking Bad that completely understands what it is and wants to be by episode 1. But more often than not, the characters, tone, and atmosphere of the show might feel very different in its first season, and that's okay. And I bring all this up because Adventure Time Season 1 falls into this category to a T. Adventure Time Season 1 very much has that first season energy. But how exactly? How is Season 1 different from the rest of the show? Well, there's a few things, so let's talk about it. Season 1 is a very episodic season of Adventure Time. It's not about having these big, deep character arcs or themes. It's more about having fun and exploring this world with these characters. And to its credit, I think Season 1 does a good job at this. This season does a good job giving off the feeling that Ooo is a very big and expansive place. It's this almost sandbox-like area for Finn and Jake to explore. This open nature to Adventure Time's world is one of my favorite aspects of the show, so obviously I'm glad it was here from the beginning. I think the tone of Season 1 is probably what makes it the most distinct from the other seasons. I mentioned earlier that Season 1 is much more episodic than the rest of the series, but in turn it's also a lot more wacky. The characters' personalities are much more exaggerated, the storylines are more inconsequential, and the show as a whole has a much more cartoony feel to it, almost akin to a 90s Nickelodeon show. Characters will frequently make over-the-top facial expressions, something that very rarely happens after Season 1. That is, until Distant Lands would bring it back about a decade later. Overall, I quite like the more cartoony nature to Season 1. I'm honestly fine with the fact that the style was mostly retired after Season 1, as it helps give this season its more unique edge. And it's interesting to see what a more Looney Tunes version of Adventure Time would look like. However, one aspect of Season 1's cartooniness that I'm kinda mixed about is the fact that the show will frequently give Finn eye whites. There are certainly times where it can be funny, but there are also times where it just kinda looks awkward and unnecessary. As you could probably guess, Season 1 puts a lot more emphasis on the humor than the other seasons, but how actually is it? Well, it's admittedly a lot more juvenile than the show had become. There's a lot more butt jokes and general toilet humor this season. I'll admit, most of these jokes don't exactly land for me, at least not anymore. However, the show usually doesn't linger on them, so they don't really bother me a lot. However, the jokes that usually do end up working for me are the more absurdist ones. The weird, unexplained one-off jokes that the show just kinda throws at you sometimes with little context. I'm a pretty big sucker when it comes to absurdist humor, and I feel like Adventure Time is one of the major reasons why. I think the most consistent quote-unquote theme to Season 1 is its approach to morals. The show will often have these ironic anti-morals that you're not supposed to take seriously, or even just makes fun of the idea of there being a moral to begin with. I quite enjoy Season 1's approach to morals as a whole. It's pretty funny and something that not a lot of shows were doing at the time. They're presented in a very ironic and sarcastic way, so I doubt most kids would actually take them seriously. So with all that said, how are our main characters in Season 1? Well, I find Finn's portrayal in Season 1 to be very interesting. He's definitely portrayed as a lot more energetic and rambunctious here, willing to just go on adventures without even thinking about it. But the season also puts a lot of emphasis on Finn's moral alignment. How he'll only kill beings that he considers to be evil, as well as his constant desire to help others. But the season also does a good job challenging Finn's beliefs, constantly putting him in situations that are much more nuanced and not very black and white. I'm very glad they did this actually, as it would have been very easy to just make Finn your generic nice protagonist who's always morally correct. The season goes out of the way to make Finn question what it truly means to be good or evil, and if there's something in between. The season does also set up Finn having a crush on Princess Bubblegum, however, it's treated a lot more casually here than it would be in seasons 2 and 3. I guess I should also talk about Finn's voice this season. Jeremy Shada had been going through puberty at around this time, meaning Finn's voice was a lot higher pitched than it would be in later seasons. I'm sure a lot of people don't like Finn's Season 1 voice, but I don't know, I find it to be kinda charming and I think it fits his childlike persona this season. I think childlike is the best way to describe this iteration of Finn. This was before he got bogged down by all the trauma and heartbreak in his life, and more or less just wanted to help others out. Much like with Finn, Jake's portrayal in Season 1 is also very different from how it would be in later seasons. He's generally portrayed as a lot more lazy in Season 1. He's a lot less willing to go on adventures than Finn is. They also generally give him a lot more food/sleep jokes this season. Another trend I noticed with Season 1 Jake is that the writers will often find an excuse to keep him from being the one to solve the conflict of the episode. You can sort of feel the writers being self-conscious about Jake. I mean, when you have a character who can essentially do anything, you have to find some way to limit his abilities. This will become significantly less of a problem in the later seasons when the stakes get higher, but for Season 1, yeah, I see why they did this. I'm sure it sounds like I don't like Jake's portrayal in Season 1, but that's really not true at all. I think even in the early seasons, the show does a great job portraying Jake as a true big brother to Finn. The two have some really wholesome moments together, and their dynamic feels real. They feel like real friends who've known each other for years. Across lifetimes, even. The show still portrays Jake as very wise and caring, which goes a long way for his likability. So even though this isn't my favorite iteration of Jake, I still wouldn't begin to call it bad. Unfortunately, however, I don't think the same can really be said about Princess Bubblegum, as she mostly existed this season just to be a potential love interest for Finn, and doesn't really have much of a personality on her own. This was long before the show started portraying her as a lot more morally gray, as she was mostly just your stereotypically nice princess character. She certainly has her moments this season, but all in all, Pee-Pee's portrayal in Season 1 just doesn't do much for me. I find Ice King's portrayal in Season 1 to be very interesting. He was definitely portrayed as much more of a threat this season. A comedic threat, certainly. However, Finn and Jake still treat him somewhat seriously as a villain, and he's nowhere near as much of a goofball as he'll become in the later seasons. However, the show still treats the Ice King with some level of nuance, making a point to highlight his true loneliness, or show that he's not as bad of a guy as Finn and Jake think. It's easy to forget, but the show was still planting seeds for Ice King's redemption even all the way back in Season 1. Now, Marceline only has 2 episodes this season, however, her role in them is very fun and very unique to this season. Since we meet Marceline the same time Finn and Jake do, we don't really have any set expectations for her yet. We're not really sure whether or not she's a good person yet because we barely know her. This leads to a very fun dynamic we don't get in the later seasons, where Marceline essentially just screws with Finn and Jake at every turn. Basically, if you liked her portrayal during the flashbacks in Obsidian, you'll like her episodes in Season 1. Now is normally the part where I talk about BMO, but in all honesty, BMO was barely even a character in Season 1. He doesn't even speak until Donnie, which is 21 episodes in. Up until that point, he mostly just existed as Finn and Jake's video game console. A part of me wonders if Nectar was originally supposed to fulfill BMO's role of being the cute robot character, but BMO, being the greedy little jerk he is, snagged it away from him. And that's Adventure Time Season 1. It's definitely not my favorite season of the show, or even in my upper half, but I still think it's a ton of fun. I feel like I'm generally a bit more defensive of it, as people have been a lot more down on this season over the years. Which makes sense as, like I said, it's definitely more juvenile and less mature than what the show would become. I don't go to Adventure Time Season 1 for its interesting drama, or storytelling, or character journeys. I go to Season 1 when I just want to have fun, and that's where it really succeeds. It's just a very fun season of television. It's admittedly not a season I go back to a ton, mostly due to its simplicity, but I always have a fun time when I do. Now, before I move on to Season 2, I think it'll be fun to make a separate video ranking my top 10 favorite episodes of Season 1. Because I'm already ripping off the real gems, might as well go all out. But in the meantime, please tell me how you feel about that wacky Season 1 goodness, and let me know what season you're looking forward to me talking about the most. Have a great day, and Kirby out.